Welcome to Earth 2.0, a digital wonderland where history has been compressed into neat little data packets, conveniently labeled for posterity. All hail the miracle of technology, where even your great-great-grandmother's cat videos are stored for eternity or until someone pulls the plug. But here's the kicker. As if someone really wanted to keep humanity's most embarrassing moments alive forever. Enter Emrise Clade, professional diplomat, part-time cynic, and full-time coffee addict, trudging through the simulated streets of old New York. If you've never had the pleasure of visiting digital Earth, imagine every sci-fi movie with a shoestring budget merged into a single, pixelated mess. At least the weather was consistent, always slightly overcast with a chance of existential dread. Emrise had a morning routine that consisted of two things: getting his daily caffeine fix and questioning the meaning of life while waiting in line. Today, however, was different. The line at Java Jitter was unusually short, and when something seems too good to be true, it usually is. He scanned his retinal ID at the counter, and the holographic barista, a perky construct with a smile plastered permanently on her digital face, chirped, "Good morning, Emrise." The usual no surprised me. Emrise replied, already regretting his decision. If life had taught him anything, it was that surprises were rarely pleasant. He leaned against the counter and pulled up his inner feed, a mental scroll of the universe's least essential updates. Buried under layers of ad spam and clickbait was something that actually piqued his interest: an anomaly report from the Historical Integrity Department. Now, anomalies in historical data were about as common as a hangover on Monday, but this one was flagged urgent. Urgent anomalies were the kind that had a nasty habit of spiraling into crises, and crises were what diplomats like Emrise lived for, if only because they got him out of dull meetings. He tapped into the report, skimming through lines of code and error messages that made as much sense as a politician's promise during election season. The gist was simple enough. Someone or something was messing with the digital archives. Entire swathes of human history were flickering like an old neon sign, threatening to wink out of existence. This wasn't just a few corrupted files or a prank by some bored hacker. This was organized, purposeful, dangerous. Your surprise, the holographic barista announced, sliding a virtual cup across the counter. Emrise eyed the concoction with suspicion. It looked like coffee and smelled like coffee, but in this digital age you could never be too sure. He took a tentative sip and grimaced. "Tastes like betrayal wrapped in disappointment," he muttered, setting the cup down. The barista giggled as though she'd just been complimented. He shook his head and focused back on the anomaly report. Someone needed to investigate, and by the looks of it, that someone was going to be him. Emrise decided to skip the rest of his morning routine. He'd already questioned the meaning of life enough for one day, and headed straight for the Historical Integrity Department. It was housed in a sleek, windowless building that looked exactly like the kind of place where fun went to die. He swiped his ID at the entrance, stepping into a sterile corridor bathed in the glow of flickering fluorescent lights. The air was thick with the scent of recycled carbon, a reminder that even artificial worlds had their version of smog. "Clade," a voice called from behind. He turned to see Lorna Vex, the department's chief analyst, striding toward him with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for tax audits. "Lorna," Emrise greeted, matching her brisk pace. "You're a sight for sore eyes and a sore everything else." "What's this I hear about history going up in smoke? It's not smoke," Lorna corrected, swiping a hand through the air to pull up a holographic display. "It's more like a slow burn. We've got entire decades flickering in and out. One moment you've got the moon landing, the next it's just a blank page. It's like someone's playing God with a really shoddy internet connection. And here I thought God had better things to do," Emrise quipped, scanning the glowing data streams. "Any leads? A few. There's a pattern, but it's subtle. Whoever's doing this knows their way around digital architecture. I'd say it's someone on the inside, but that'd be admitting we have a mole." And I like to think our hiring standards are at least better than that. Hope springs eternal, Emrise replied dryly. All right, what can I do? Dig deeper. The usual channels are drawing blanks, but you've got a knack for finding things that don't want to be found, like my coffee mug, he joked. Fine. I'll poke around, see what I can unearth. As Emrise made his way to the archive servers, his mind began to churn over the possibilities. Sabotage, cyberterrorism, a particularly disgruntled AI. Each possibility was as unappealing as the last, and each carried its own brand of catastrophe. The archive room was a cathedral of data, rows upon rows of humming servers stretching into infinity. Emrise logged in and began his deep dive into the ocean of human history, fingers dancing over the haptic interface with practiced precision. The anomalies were easy enough to spot if you knew what to look for. Tiny discrepancies in the timestamps, glitches in the metadata, like digital breadcrumbs leading to, and there it was. A cluster of abnormalities centered around the late 21st century, a time period known for its significant geopolitical upheavals and technological advancements. Funny how the chaos of yesteryear seemed quaint compared to the present digital conundrum. Emrise zoomed in on the data, isolating corrupted files and cross-referencing them against known historical events. The deeper he digged, the more unsettling the pattern became. It wasn't just random snippets disappearing. It was a systematic erasure of key moments in human development. If whoever was behind this succeeded, humanity's entire legacy could be rewritten, or worse, erased altogether. He rubbed his temples, feeling the onset of a headache that had nothing to do with caffeine withdrawal. All right, Emrise, think, he muttered to himself. If you were a shadowy figure hell-bent on deleting history, where would you hide? Just then, a notification blinked in the corner of his vision, interrupting his train of thought. It was an encrypted message with no sender ID. Emrise opened it cautiously, half expecting a digital virus to leap out and bite him on the nose. Instead, it was a single line of text. You're not alone. Well, that's ominous, he said aloud, though there was no one around to appreciate his sarcasm. The message could mean anything, a warning, a threat, or just someone's idea of a cruel joke. But Emrise had a gut feeling it was none of the above. He glanced around the archive room, its silent servers standing sentinel like monolithic guardians of forgotten truths. Somewhere in this vast expanse of data was the key to unraveling the mystery, and possibly the identity of whoever was pulling the strings. With renewed determination and the grim realization that his life just got a hell of a lot more complicated, Emrise Clade plunged back into the digital depths, ready to uncover whatever secrets lay buried in the code. He could only hope he'd find the answers before history itself became history. The clock was ticking, and time, as Emrise reminded himself, was not on their side. Emrise Clade, caffeine-deprived and running on nothing but sheer bloody-mindedness, knew he needed backup if he was going to unravel this digital mess before it dragged him into a spiraling vortex of bureaucratic hell. That meant finding someone who could navigate the tangled web of historical data with their eyes closed, someone like Zephyrah Nail. Zephyrah was a legend in the business. Rumor had it she could read binary like a fortune teller reads tea leaves, although her predictions often came with a side of existential despair. Emrise had met her years ago during a diplomatic snafu when someone accidentally deleted the Treaty of Mars from the archives. You'd think folks would learn to keep their fingers off the delete key. Tracking Zephyrah down wasn't difficult. She had a reputation for sticking to her favorite haunts like a barnacle to a ship's hull. She could usually be found in the depths of the Digital Earth Library, a cavernous place filled with the history of everything, which ironically made it the least visited spot for today's attention-deficient society. The library entrance loomed before him like a gaping maw, or perhaps it was just his imagination. It had a way of making even the most mundane locations seem ominous. He swiped his ID and walked in, greeted by the gentle hum of data servers and the flicker of holographic displays projecting summaries of human history, assuming anyone cared to look. Zephyra was hunched over a holographic console in the far corner, her fingers dancing like spiders across the interface. She wore the same black lab coat she'd had for as long as he'd known her, though it looked even more threadbare now if that was possible. "Zephyra," Imrise called out, approaching her table. "I need you to work your magic. Seems someone's trying to history wipe us from existence." She didn't look up, didn't even pause in her furious typing. "Clade, heard you were still alive. Thought your cynicism would have devoured you by now." "Yeah, well, rumors of my demise and all that," he replied, pulling up a chair. "Got a problem I can't solve with coffee, so here I am." "Must be serious," Zephyra said dryly. "So what's the damage?" Imrise laid out the situation, explaining the anomalies and the potential threat they posed. Zephyra listened, nodding occasionally but otherwise focused on her work. She had the kind of concentration that made you feel guilty for interrupting, like watching a surgeon at work. "Let me see the data," she finally said, gesturing for him to transfer the files over. Imrise obliged, sending her everything he had on the anomalies. She sifted through the information with the efficiency of a machine, her eyes narrowing as she delved deeper into the code. "Someone's been busy," Zephyra commented, a hint of admiration in her voice. "This isn't just a case of sloppy coding, it's deliberate, precise, like a scalpel removing just enough to cripple but not kill. Any idea who'd be interested in that kind of selective amnesia?" Imrise asked, though he suspected it was a long shot. The universe was full of meddlesome idiots. "Plenty," Zephyra replied, her fingers still flying over the console. "But this isn't their style, too subtle. Whoever's behind this is playing a long game. The kind that ends with all of us wondering if we ever really existed." "Exactly." She paused, then frowned at the screen. "There's something else. An algorithm buried deep in the code, doesn't look human." Imrise leaned in, intrigued. "Alien. You're not just messing with me, right? Would I joke about something this tedious?" Zephyra shot back, pushing the display toward him. "See these patterns? They're not random. It's like an outsider's attempt to mimic human decision-making. Clunky but effective. The concept of alien algorithms fiddling with humanity's history was enough to send a shiver down even Imrise's cynical spine. So what? We've got ET. Rewriting our term papers now. Seems like it," Zephyra replied. "And they're good. Whatever this thing is, it's designed to erase key events. It's like they want to snip the threads that hold our history together." "And if they succeed?" Imrise asked, though he already knew the answer. "Then we're left with a jumble of memories, a puzzle with missing pieces. No context, no continuity. Just chaos." Imrise shook his head, running a hand through his hair. "What's the motive, you think? Why would anyone or anything want to do this?" Zephyra shrugged, the motion almost imperceptible. "Maybe they think our history is better left forgotten, or maybe they're trying to control the narrative. Create a past that suits their agenda." "Sounds like a politician's wet dream," Imrise muttered, earning a rare smile from Zephyra. "Well, the good news is we've got a starting point," she said. "This algorithm leaves traces. We can track it, see where it's coming from." "Great. Let's play detective then," Imrise said. "I've always wanted to save humanity's history to my resume." Zephyra snorted softly, then returned her focus to the console. "All right, I'll start mapping the algorithm's path. It'll take some time, but I'll get us a lead." Imrise nodded and settled back into his chair, the weight of the situation pressing down on him like an over-enthusiastic sumo wrestler. The universe, it seemed, had no shortage of surprises, and very few of them ever spelled good news. But if there was one thing Imrise had learned in his years as a diplomat, it was that giving up just wasn't an option. Not when there was still coffee in the pot and hope, however misguided, in the air. "So, any idea where this alien code might be hiding?" Imrise asked, watching Zephyra work her magic on the console. "Could be anywhere," she replied, a tinge of frustration in her voice. "These things don't exactly come with a return address, but I'll find it. I've cracked tougher nuts than this." "Glad to hear it. I hate nuts. Imrais leaned back, crossing his arms. You know, sometimes I wonder why I didn't take up a less stressful job, like bomb disposal. Zephyra chuckled, a rare sound that echoed in the library's vast emptiness. You wouldn't last a day, too much pressure, and you'd have to stop for coffee breaks. Good point, he conceded. I guess I'm stuck with this gig. Silence settled over them as Zephyra continued her work, the soft clicking of keys a comforting lullaby in the otherwise silent library. Imrais watched as lines of code danced across the screen, each one a potential clue to unraveling this mystery. It wasn't long before Zephyra spoke again, her voice tinged with excitement. Found something, a trail. Imrais leaned forward, his interest piqued. Where does it lead? To a sector of the archives we don't usually touch. Way out in left field, could be where they're hiding. Imrais grinned. Great. Let's go shake the tree and see what falls out. Zephyra nodded, already standing up. Let's. They left the library together, a pair of unlikely allies bound by necessity and a common goal. As they walked, Imrais couldn't help but reflect on the absurdity of it all. Here they were, chasing alien algorithms through a digital wonderland, trying to save a history most of humanity couldn't be bothered to remember. But that was the thing about history. It had a way of demanding attention, whether you liked it or not. The sector Zephyra had identified was one of the older parts of the archive, a place few ventured into unless they were truly desperate or truly curious. The corridors were narrower here, the lighting dimmer, casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance along the walls. It felt like walking into the past, fittingly enough. This is it, Zephyra said, stopping in front of a nondescript door that looked like all the others. She swiped her ID and the door slid open with a hiss, revealing a small room filled with humming servers and blinking lights. Imrais followed her inside, the air thick with the smell of ozone and dust. This the place. Has to be, Zephyra replied, moving to a console. All signs point here. Let's see what we've got. Imrais watched as she accessed the system, her fingers moving swiftly over the keys. The servers hummed in response, screens lighting up with a dazzling display of data. There, Zephyra said, pointing at a section of code on the screen. That's our alien friend. It's been busy, all right. So how do we stop it? Imrais asked, feeling a surge of hope. Simple, Zephyra replied, a gleam in her eye. We cut it off at the source. Sever the connection and it's game over. You make it sound so easy. Trust me, nothing's easy, she said with a wry smile. But it's doable, and once we stop this thing, we can trace it back to whoever or whatever sent it. Sounds like a plan, Imrais agreed. Let's pull the plug. Zephyra nodded, her hands moving deftly over the console as she prepared to isolate the rogue algorithm. Imrais watched, feeling a strange mix of anticipation and dread. If they succeeded, they'd stop the erasure of human history. If they failed, well, he didn't want to think about that. With a final keystroke, Zephyra initiated the sequence, the servers whirring loudly in response. Imrais held his breath, watching as the screen displayed progress markers, each one a step closer to severing the connection. Finally, Zephyra leaned back, a satisfied smile on her face. Done, connection severed. That should stall it, at least for now. Imrais let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Nice work, so what now? Now we trace it, Zephyra replied. Find out where it came from and who's responsible. And then we have a nice, friendly chat with them about how erasing history is a big no-no. Exactly, she said with a grin. Think you can manage that, Mr. Diplomat? Imrais chuckled, feeling more optimistic than he had in days. Oh, I think I can manage just fine. Let's go save history, one deleted file at a time. With their newfound lead in hand, Imrais and Zephyra left the archive room, ready to dive deeper into the mystery and uncover the truth. It was a daunting task, but they weren't alone. And sometimes, a little company was all it took to turn the tide. Imrais and Zephyra made their way through the winding corridors, each step accompanied by the persistent hum of unseen machinery. The place had all the charm of a forgotten factory floor, where the air tasted like recycled defeat and the overhead lights flickered with the enthusiasm of an overworked office drone. "So, we've got an alien algorithm that's more adaptive than a politician's morals," Imrai said, hands jammed into his pockets. "What's next? Do we wait until it evolves into our new robot overlord?" "No, we cut it off at the knees before it learns how to vote," Zephyra replied, her expression unreadable but her tone as dry as a Martian desert. "If this thing's as smart as it seems, it's probably already laying digital traps." "Traps, huh? As if this job wasn't hazardous enough," Imrais muttered. "Great, now I get to dodge invisible bear traps in cyberspace. My dream come true." They reached a small, dimly lit hub filled with consoles and tangled wires. The room looked like it had been designed by a mad scientist with a grudge against tidiness. Zephyra headed straight to the central console, her fingers ready to dance across the keys like a virtuoso pianist with a caffeine addiction. "All right, let's see what our sneaky friend is up to," she said, pulling up a series of data streams. The screens flared to life, casting an eerie glow that made the room feel like a haunted arcade. Imrais leaned against a nearby wall, trying not to look too impressed. "You ever think this thing is just screwing with us for fun, like it's some alien teenager pulling a cosmic prank?" "It's possible," Zephyra replied, not taking her eyes off the screen. "But I'm betting there's more at stake than just some intergalactic jollies." "Of course there is," Imrais said, rolling his eyes. "There's always an agenda, probably something about universal domination. Or maybe they just want to make sure we never remember who won the last World Cup." "Wouldn't surprise me," Zephyra said, a rare smirk tugging at her lips. "But I think our alien friend is a bit more sophisticated than that." As if to prove her point, the screen suddenly flickered with a new string of code. It was elegant in its complexity, like a digital labyrinth designed to confuse and mislead. Zephyra's brow furrowed as she examined the patterns. "Looks like it's adapting," she noted, irritation creeping into her voice. "It's learned from our last attempt and is now blocking off certain data points." Imrai sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Fantastic. An algorithm that learns faster than my last intern. So what do we do? Can we outsmart it?" Zephyra tapped a few keys, her mind working at warp speed. "Outsmarting it is the only option. We need to make it think it's beaten us, then hit it where it hurts. Like a digital game of chess, except the pieces are invisible and the board keeps changing." "Exactly," Zephyra replied. "But remember, every move we make, it counters. We have to think a few steps ahead." "Use misdirection." "I'm more of a checkers guy, but I'll give it a shot," Imrais said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "So, what's your plan?" "We tweak our countermeasures, create false trails to confuse it, make it chase its own tail while we find the source," Zephyra explained, her fingers flying over the keys as she implemented her strategy. "Sounds ambitious," Imrai said, watching the code shift and change under Zephyra's expert manipulation. "What do we do if it gets too smart?" "Then we switch to brute force and hope for the best," Zephyra answered, not missing a beat. "Adaptability goes both ways." Imrais nodded, a grin spreading across his face. "I like it. Just like humans to solve a problem by hitting it really hard." Zephyra chuckled softly. "When in doubt, brute force it out. It's not just our species' motto, it's a way of life." The two worked in tandem, developing and deploying new algorithms designed to mislead and misdirect their unseen adversary. It was a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, with the fate of human history hanging in the balance. Each time the alien algorithm adapted, Zephyra and Imrais were there with a new plan, a new misdirection. As the hours wore on, Imrais found himself growing increasingly weary. His mind was a foggy mess of coffee cravings and digital conundrums, but he pushed through, fueled by a stubborn refusal to lose. Meanwhile, Zephyra's focus was unyielding, her determination an unstoppable force that drove her efforts. "What's next?" Imrais asked after a particularly frustrating string of countermeasures were thwarted by the alien program. Zephyra paused, adjusting her glasses in a rare moment of contemplation. We need to dig deeper, find something it hasn't seen before, a vulnerability it hasn't accounted for. Emrise sighed, running a hand through his hair. You know, I used to think the idea of aliens was exciting. Now it just seems like a bureaucratic nightmare with extra steps. Welcome to the reality of extraterrestrial interaction, Zephyra quipped, eyes still glued to the console. Less ET phone home and more ET, rewrite your history without asking. Great. Maybe next they'll send a virus that makes us forget how to tie our own shoelaces, Emrise said, his voice heavy with sarcasm. Zephyra flashed him a quick smile, then returned to her work. If we crack this, I promise I'll petition for new shoelace technology. They continued their work, an unspoken camaraderie forming between them as they fought against a common enemy. It was a strange kind of partnership, forged in the fires of digital warfare, but it was effective. They were a well-oiled machine, their banter a welcome distraction from the grim reality of their task. After what felt like an eternity of digital cat and mouse, Zephyra finally let out a triumphant noise. Got it, a weakness. Emrise perked up, feeling a jolt of adrenaline at the prospect of a breakthrough. Really? What is it? An oversight in its code, Zephyra explained. A small gap where its defenses are weaker. We can exploit it, push through, and trace the origin. Fantastic, Emrise said, unable to suppress a grin. Let's poke it where it hurts. Zephyra nodded, her eyes alight with determination. Ready? As I'll ever be, Emrise replied, bracing himself for whatever came next. With a few quick keystrokes, Zephyra initiated the sequence, targeting the algorithm's weak spot. The screens flared to life with a storm of data, numbers cascading down the display in a dizzying array. Emrise held his breath, watching as their program slowly began to infiltrate the alien algorithm's defenses. It was like watching a climber painstakingly ascend a sheer cliff face, each move calculated and deliberate. Come on, Emrise muttered under his breath, his eyes glued to the screen. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Zephyra let out a breathless laugh. We're in, we did it. Emrise released a sigh of relief, his shoulders sagging as the tension drained from his body. We're in? Yes, Zephyra confirmed, her fingers dancing over the keys. Now we trace it. See where it leads. The room was filled with a tense silence as Zephyra worked her magic, tracing the algorithm back through the tangled web of digital pathways. Emrise watched, his heart pounding in his chest as the truth slowly began to unfold. At last, Zephyra leaned back, a satisfied smile on her face. There, we've got a location. Where? Emrise asked, his voice a mixture of curiosity and anticipation. An abandoned sector of the archives, Zephyra replied, turning the screen toward him. A place we haven't touched in years. Emrise frowned, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. So someone or something is hiding out in our backyard playing games with our history. Seems like it, Zephyra said, her eyes gleaming with determination. But now we know where to find them. Emrise nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. All right then, let's go pay them a visit. I'm curious to meet the creators of our friendly little algorithm. Zephyra stood, her movements precise and deliberate. I hope they're ready for company. I'm sure they'll be thrilled, Emrise said, his tone wry. Nothing like a surprise visit from two people who want to discuss their questionable life choices. Together, they left the console room, their footsteps echoing through the corridors as they made their way to the abandoned sector. The air was thick with anticipation, each step bringing them closer to the heart of the mystery. As they walked, Emrise couldn't help but reflect on the absurdity of it all. Here they were, chasing an alien program through the digital remnants of humanity's past, trying to stop an unseen enemy from rewriting history. It was the kind of story that would sound insane in any other context, but in the world they lived in, it was just another day at the office. Think we'll find anything useful? Emrise asked, breaking the silence. Hopefully, Zephyra replied. But even if we don't, we'll be one step closer to understanding what we're up against. Emrise nodded, his mind racing with possibilities. And if we find whoever, or whatever, is behind this, then we have a chat, Zephyra said, her voice firm, "and remind them why meddling with humanity's past is a very bad idea." Emrise grinned, feeling a strange sense of camaraderie with his unlikely partner. "I like the way you think." They continued their journey, each step bringing them closer to the truth. Whatever lay ahead, they were ready to face it together. And as they delved deeper into the heart of the digital labyrinth, Emrise couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much larger adventure. An adventure filled with danger, intrigue, and the kind of dark humor that made it all worthwhile. Emrise and Zephyra walked briskly through the winding corridors of digital Earth, the simulated echoes of their footsteps bouncing off the pixelated walls. They were making their way to the abandoned sector of archives, hidden away in the digital depths of this man-made purgatory. It was, as usual, an ordinary day of extraordinary crap. "Do you get the feeling this place was designed by a sadist with a love for mazes?" Emrise asked, narrowly avoiding a loose cable that seemed determined to trip him up. Zephyra gave a dry laugh, or a city planner with a drinking problem. "Either way, I doubt they had ergonomics in mind. Remind me why we're the ones stuck fixing history again." Emrise grumbled, though he already knew the answer. "Because they were the only ones stupid enough to try. Because we're the best of the worst," Zephyra replied, her sarcasm as cutting as ever. "If we don't do it, who will?" The holographic barista Emrise grimaced at the thought. "Sure, if we wanted our archives sorted by taste preference and latte art." As they neared the entrance to the abandoned sector, the air seemed to grow colder, as if the digital ghosts of forgotten centuries were eager to haunt them. The portal stood before them, a forbidding gateway to the past, or at least to the forgotten corners of it. Zephyra activated the access panel, her fingers a blur over the keypad. "Here we go." "Into the belly of the beast. No turning back now," Emrise said, trying to sound braver than he felt. In reality, his stomach was churning like a blender on high. The portal hissed open, revealing a darkened corridor lined with ancient data servers. The servers hummed softly, like a choir of disgruntled bees. Emrise could almost hear the echoes of forgotten scandals and unremembered wars whispering through the wires. "Cozy," he muttered, stepping inside. Zephyra flicked on her wrist console, casting a dim glow that barely punctured the gloom. "Let's find our phantom menace and have a little chat, shall we?" They moved cautiously through the archives, scanning the servers for signs of tampering. The only things more unsettling than the silence were the occasional errant data sparks that leapt from console to console like digital ghosts. "This place is a fire hazard with an identity crisis," Emrise said, ducking under a particularly low-hanging conduit. "I'm half expecting a gremlin to leap out and demand a toll." Zephyra smirked. "If that happens, let me know. I've always wanted to negotiate with a mythical creature." Their banter was cut short by a sudden flicker of light. One of the servers ahead was pulsing with an unnatural glow, like a digital heartbeat gone rogue. "There," Zephyra whispered, pointing. "That's our culprit." Emrise swallowed hard, the adrenaline kicking into overdrive. "Let's introduce ourselves then." As they approached, the glow intensified, casting eerie shadows on the walls. It was almost beautiful in its own ominous way, an unsettling reminder that even digital death could be aesthetically pleasing. Zephyra tapped her console, initiating a scan of the rogue server. "There's definitely something alive in there, or as alive as code can be." Emrise moved closer, squinting at the alien algorithm that was slowly unraveling on the screen. "Looks like a bunch of angry spaghetti." "What's it up to?" Zephyra's brow furrowed as she analyzed the data. "It's accelerating its processes. Shit, it's speeding up the historical erasures. Whole centuries are vanishing faster than a politician's promise after an election." Emrise felt his heart skip a beat. "Any idea why? Is it trying to cover something up, or just trying to wipe us off the map before we can stop it?" Zephyra replied grimly. "Either way, this isn't good." Emrise ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. "So what's the plan?" Sweet talk it into submission, More like Crash Its Party, Zephyra said, her fingers dancing over her console as she began crafting a counterattack. We need to dig deeper, find out where all this code is coming from. Emrise nodded, doing his best to keep his panic at bay. Let's hope it's not throwing a surprise birthday bash for all its alien buddies. Just as Zephyra was about to launch her countermeasures, the screens around them flared to life, displaying a kaleidoscope of alien scripts. It was like being surrounded by the visual equivalent of a migraine. Looks like they are onto us, Emrise said through gritted teeth. Time to crash the party. Zephyra unleashed her countermeasures, sending a barrage of digital probes into the alien code. The servers hummed louder in response, the air crackling with tension. "They are resisting," Zephyra muttered, her hands a blur over her console. "But we're making progress." Emrise watched as their probes began to pierce the alien defenses, inching ever closer to the source. It was like watching a siege in miniature, each line of code a soldier in the battle for history. Come on, Emrise urged, his heart pounding. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Zephyra found a weakness in the code, a chink in the armor that opened a path to the heart of the algorithm. There, she said triumphantly, the glow of the screen reflecting in her eyes. "We're in," Emrise let out the breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "What do you see?" Zephyra's expression grew grim as she traced the code back to its origins. "It's a coalition. Several alien entities working together, orchestrating this whole mess." Emrise felt a cold chill settle in his stomach. "A coalition? You mean there's more than one of these bastards?" "Looks like it," Zephyra confirmed, her voice tight with tension. "They're not just erasing history, they are rewriting it." The enormity of the situation hit Emrise like a punch to the gut. Rewriting it? For what? To make themselves the heroes of our story or the villains, Zephyra said darkly. "Either way, they are unraveling everything we know." Emrise shook his head in disbelief. "Fantastic. We're not just dealing with an alien algorithm. We're dealing with a whole damn conspiracy." Zephyra nodded, her determination unshaken. "But at least now we know what we're up against, and we won't let them win." Emrise admired her resolve even as his own confidence wavered. "So, what do we do now?" "We can't exactly send them a strongly worded email," Zephyra smirked. "No, but we can hit them where it hurts. We've got their location." Time to take the fight to them. Emrise felt a spark of hope ignite within him. It was a long shot, but it was their only shot. Let's make them regret ever picking this fight. Together they left the digital archives, their minds set on the task ahead. They had uncovered the truth, a truth that was terrifying in its implications. But they also had the means to fight back. As they strode through the corridors, Emrise couldn't help but feel a sense of camaraderie with Zephyra. They were an unlikely team, brought together by circumstance, but united in their mission to protect the past and secure the future. "Think we'll make it?" Emrise asked, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around them. Zephyra glanced at him, her eyes filled with a quiet determination. "We have to. Because if we don't, nobody else will." Emrise nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. They might be up against impossible odds, but they were far from beaten. And as they prepared for the battle to come, Emrise couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. A beginning rife with danger, deception, and dark humor, the kind that made life worth living, even in its bleakest moments. "Let's show those aliens what it means to mess with humans," Emrise said, his confidence returning with a vengeance. Zephyra grinned, a fierce glint in her eye. "Damn right. They picked the wrong species to screw with." Together, they marched toward their destiny, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. It was a daunting task, but they were undeterred. Because in the end, they were human, and humans never backed down from a fight, especially when history itself was on the line. Emrise Clade felt the weight of impending doom like a broken elevator cable, dangling precariously above his head. As he and Zephyra made their way back to the small, dimly lit hub that served as their base camp, the realization of their situation sat in his stomach like a bad burrito. the kind you regret almost immediately after consuming. Outmatched by an alien coalition rewriting history, Imrise muttered, kicking a stray cable out of the way. Could this get any worse? Zephyra, her eyes glued to her wrist console as always, answered without looking up. I don't know, Imrise. Would you like to tempt fate a bit more? Maybe suggest a meteor shower, an inexplicable outbreak of space herpes. Imrise snorted. Space herpes would be the cherry on top of this disaster sundae. He rubbed his temples, trying to soothe the headache that was quickly becoming his constant companion. The hub was a mess of tangled wires and flickering consoles, a chaotic reflection of his mind. Zephyra plopped down in front of the main console, her fingers dancing across the keys like a drunken spider. I'm running a diagnostic to see if there's anything we've missed, she said, her voice laced with frustration. There's got to be something we can use to counter these bastards. Imrise dropped into a chair next to her, the squeaky wheel under him protesting loudly. You ever get the feeling we're just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic? He asked. Zephyra gave him a sidelong glance. Every damn day, Imrise. But at least we're doing it with style. He chuckled, though it was devoid of any real joy. If only style could save our hides. They sat in silence as Zephyra worked, the only sound the soft hum of the servers. Imrise stared at the digital wall, the simulated image of a starry night sky doing little to ease his anxiety. Why do you think they're doing it? He asked finally. The aliens, I mean. What's the point of rewriting history? Zephyra shrugged, not pausing in her work. Could be anything. Control, power, boredom. Maybe they're just a bunch of history buffs with a god complex. Well, they're doing a bang-up job of making us obsolete, Imrise said. I mean, who needs humans when you can just rewrite them into oblivion? Zephyra paused, her fingers hovering over the console. You ever wonder if that's the point? Maybe they're scared of us, of what we might become. Imrise laughed, a short, bitter sound. Scared of us, please. We're barely holding it together as it is. Exactly, Zephyra said, her eyes meeting his. And yet here we are, still fighting, still refusing to go quietly into whatever digital night they have planned. Imrise wanted to believe her, to cling to that thread of hope. But the truth was, they were two people against an invisible enemy with the power to rewrite millennia. It was hard to feel like anything but a speck of dust in an uncaring universe. Found something, Zephyra said suddenly, breaking the oppressive silence. Imrise leaned forward, his heart skipping a beat. What is it? It's a data fragment, she said, her eyes narrowing as she focused on the screen. Looks like a message hidden deep within the historical archives. It's old, really old. From when? Imrise asked, trying to keep the excitement out of his voice. The last thing he needed was to get his hopes up, only to have them dashed against the rocks of reality. From the early days of digital Earth, Zephyra replied. Back when humanity was transitioning from analog to digital, trying to preserve what they could. Imrise swallowed, a sense of awe washing over him. You think it's a message from them, from the people who built all this? Maybe, Zephyra said, her voice thoughtful. Or maybe it's a trap, only one way to know. She initiated a decryption sequence, the console beeping softly as it worked to unravel the digital puzzle. Imrise watched, his nerves a live wire beneath his skin. After what felt like an eternity, the screen flickered, displaying a garbled string of characters. Zephyra frowned, adjusting a few settings before leaning back in her chair. Here we go, she said. Let's see what our ancestors have to say. The message unfurled on the screen, and for a moment neither of them spoke. It was written in an older dialect, the syntax awkward and clunky compared to modern language, but the meaning was clear enough. To those who follow, Zephyra read aloud, her voice steady. If you find this, know that we faced extinction. Our world crumbled not from war or plague, but from erasure. Imrise felt a chill run down his spine. Sounds familiar, he said. Zephyra continued, her eyes scanning the screen. We leave behind our knowledge, our stories, in the hopes that they might guide you. Protect history, for it is the foundation upon which our future must be built. Well, that's a nice sentiment, Imrise said, trying to mask his unease with humor. But a little light on specifics, don't you think? Zephyra shrugged. It's a start. And maybe there's more here than meets the eye. Emrise leaned back, considering the implications. You think this message is meant for us, a way to fight back? Could be, Zephyra replied. Or it could be a desperate attempt to leave something behind, a digital tombstone for a forgotten civilization. Emrise nodded, processing the information. Either way, it's all we've got. And if they survived long enough to leave this message, maybe there's hope for us too. Zephyra smiled, a small, determined curve of her lips. See, you're getting the hang of this optimism thing. Don't get used to it, Emrise warned, though he couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. One crisis at a time. As they sat in the dimly lit hub, surrounded by the hum of ancient servers, Emrise felt a renewed sense of purpose. They might be outmatched, their enemy might be invisible, but they weren't alone. They had the legacy of those who came before, a guiding light in the digital darkness. Let's find out what else they left us, Emrise said, a new determination in his voice. Right behind you, Zephyra replied, turning back to the console with renewed vigor. Together they dove into the archives, searching for the breadcrumbs left by their ancestors. It was a daunting task, like piecing together a shattered mirror, but they were undeterred. Because they weren't just fighting for their own survival, they were fighting for the survival of history itself. As the hours passed, Emrise and Zephyra worked tirelessly, sifting through the digital detritus of a lost age. They were explorers in a land of forgotten code, archaeologists of the intangible. And with each discovery, each fragment of knowledge, they felt a little closer to the truth, a little closer to the answers they desperately needed. This is it, Zephyra said at last, her voice tinged with excitement. I think I've found something. Emrise leaned over her shoulder, peering at the screen. What is it? It's a set of coordinates, Zephyra explained, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. Hidden within the message. I think it's a location, a physical place where we might find more information. A scavenger hunt, Emrise said, a grin spreading across his face. I always loved those as a kid. Zephyra chuckled. Something tells me this won't end with a prize ribbon and a pat on the back. No, but it might end with us saving history, Emrise replied, his spirits lifted by the prospect of a new lead. And wouldn't that be something? Zephyra nodded, her expression turning serious. It's a risk, Emrise. We don't know what we'll find or if we'll find anything at all. I know, he said, meeting her gaze with determination. But it's a risk we have to take, because if we don't, the aliens win. They erase everything we've ever been, everything we ever will be. Then let's not keep them waiting, Zephyra said, her voice filled with resolve. With a shared sense of purpose, they prepared to set out on their next mission. Emrise felt a renewed sense of camaraderie with Zephyra, their partnership forged in the fires of adversity. Think we'll make it? He asked, echoing the question he'd posed earlier. Zephyra smiled, a fierce light in her eyes. We have to, because if we don't, nobody else will. As they left the digital hub, Emrise couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. They were racing against time, against an enemy that could rewrite history with a keystroke. But they had a plan, a path forward. Let's show those aliens what it means to mess with humans, Emrise said, his voice filled with determination. Zephyra grinned, an expression of fierce confidence. Damn right. They picked the wrong species to screw with. Together they ventured into the unknown, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. It was a daunting task, a fight against impossible odds, but they were undeterred, because in the end they were human, and humans never back down from a fight, especially when history itself was on the line. As they traveled to the coordinates left by their ancestors, Emrise felt a renewed sense of hope. They might be outmatched, their enemy might be invisible, but they weren't alone. They had the legacy of those who came before, a guiding light in the digital darkness. The journey would be long, the path fraught with danger, but they were ready. Because they weren't just fighting for their own survival, they were fighting for the survival of history itself. And that, Emrise realized, was a cause worth fighting for. Imrai's Clade wiped a bead of sweat from his brow and watched the digital horizon flicker, his optimistic zeal waning like the battery on an obsolete gadget. Here they were, on the brink of who knew what, guided only by the ghostly whispers of their ancestors. Just another Tuesday in the history-erasing, reality-bending cluster of **K that was digital Earth. Ready to stick it to the aliens? He asked, more to shake off the nerves than anything. Zephyra Nail, ever the sane one among them, tapped away at her wrist console with the skill of a pianist who didn't care if the audience was asleep. She glanced up, her eyes gleaming with the kind of confidence that could only come from a lifetime of reading binary tea leaves. Are we ever ready? I mean, how does one even prepare to take on an alien algorithm with the consistency of a wet noodle? With style and a complete lack of forethought, Imrai's replied, adjusting the strap of his gear. And maybe some explosives, if we're lucky. They were standing at the edge of old New York, a simulation so worn it might as well be the digital equivalent of a thrift store sweater. The coordinates from the message pointed them here, into the guts of the city that never sleeps but often glitches. Zephyra's fingers danced across her console, pulling up a holographic map that hovered between them like a ghost. According to this, our target's right under the Flatiron building, or at least what's left of it. Imrai squinted at the projection. Great, so we're trespassing in a digital tourist trap. Anything else we should know? Well, legend has it the original digital Earth programmers left something behind. A failsafe, maybe, or just their lunch leftovers. Considering our luck, probably the latter, Imrai muttered. But even as sarcasm brushed his words, he felt a flicker of something inside him. Hope, maybe, or indigestion, hard to tell these days. They set off, weaving through alleyways rendered in pixelated monochrome, the neon haze of bygone advertisements casting an eerie glow. The air was thick with the hum of dormant circuits, the kind of quiet that made you feel like you were about to be mugged by a metaphor. Why do you think they did it? Zephyra asked, breaking the uneasy silence. The original programmers, I mean. Why leave a failsafe? Paranoia. Or maybe they just wanted to give future generations a little treasure hunt, Imrai speculated. Seems like they knew the aliens might try to scribble all over our history books. Or maybe they just liked the idea of screwing with future historians. I mean, everyone loves a prank that takes a few centuries to pay off. Imrai chuckled. Nothing like a good temporal knee-slapper. As they closed in on the coordinates, the simulated cityscape began to warp, pixelated details flickering like a badly tuned holo broadcast. The Flatiron building loomed ahead, its iconic silhouette marred by the occasional data hiccup. A place where even the ghosts of the past would get lost. Imrai approached the entrance, a shadow of its former self, exaggerated by the distortion of memory and faulty code. Here we are, home of the world's first and only digital failsafe/mystery box. Zephyra scanned the area with her wrist console, her gaze narrowing. Got a live feed on something beneath us, some kind of energy signature. Could be the failsafe. Or a bomb, who knows? Let's hope it's the kind of explosive that only blows minds, Imrai quipped. With Zephyra guiding him, they descended the staircase that seemed more suited to a horror movie than a historical discovery. The air turned cooler, the walls closing in like they had something to hide. Why is it that every plan involves going underground? Zephyra mused aloud. Like we're rats in a maze of our own making. Because that's where the bad decisions like to burrow, Imrai replied. The stairway ended at a rusted door, an anomaly in this digital landscape, and Imrai couldn't help but wonder if knocking would make a difference. But Zephyra, ever the woman of action, bypassed the need for subtlety with her console, coaxing the door open with a hiss of pressurized air. Inside was a room that could only be described as the love child of a server farm and a conspiracy theorist's dream. Towers of obsolete tech hummed with forgotten power, wires snaking over the floor like drunken spaghetti. Welcome to the digital graveyard, Zephyra declared, scanning the array of machines. This must be the failsafe, or the world's most elaborate screensaver, Imrai noted, moving among the towers with a mix of awe and trepidation. "Any idea what we're looking for?" Zephyra shrugged, her fingers dancing across her console with the kind of nonchalance that only came with prolonged exposure to doom. "There's a central terminal here. Old tech. But if the message is right, it holds the key to rewriting whatever the aliens have changed." Emrise approached the terminal, a relic from an era when screens wouldn't have been considered retro. "So we just turn it on," Zephyra smirked. "If it's anything like the coffee machine at Java Jitter, you might have to sweet-talk it first." He grinned, flipping the switch with a flourish that belied his nerves. The terminal flickered to life, displaying a menu written in an antiquated code that buzzed with potential. It was like finding a treasure chest in a landfill. The screen glowed, revealing a series of prompts. "Looks like it wants us to input a command. Any ideas?" Zephyra leaned over, scanning the options. "Try restore default. I mean, when in doubt, revert to factory settings, right? Let's hope the factory wasn't built by lunatics." Emrise typed the command, pressing enter with the kind of faith usually reserved for lottery tickets and last prayers. The terminal whirred, a cascade of characters flooding the screen before settling into something resembling coherence. A message hidden within the code appeared like a whispered secret from the past. "To those who come after us," Zephyra read aloud, her voice steady despite the gravity of their situation. "We leave this key, an antidote to the rewriting of history. Use it wisely, for it may be your only chance." Emrise felt his heart skip, a mix of elation and fear. "Looks like the ancestors left us more than breadcrumbs." Zephyra nodded, her eyes fixed on the screen. "This could disrupt the alien algorithm, revert their changes, but it's a gamble, like everything else in life," Emrise said, a grin tugging at his lips. "But if there's anyone who loves a good gamble, it's us." Zephyra's fingers danced over the keys, her movements precise and deliberate. "Let's roll the dice, then. We've got nothing to lose but everything." They activated the failsafe, the terminal's hum deepening as it processed the command. Lights flickered across the room, a symphony of hope and uncertainty. "Think it'll work?" Emrise asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zephyra shrugged, her usual confidence tempered with realism. "If it doesn't, at least we tried. And if it does, we might just make history." A moment passed, heavy with anticipation. The room seemed to hold its breath, the air charged with the weight of possibility. Then, with a shudder, the terminal completed its task. A wave of energy surged through the room, a digital pulse that swept outward, carrying with it the hopes of those long gone. "Did we do it?" Emrise asked, his heart pounding as he glanced at Zephyra. She checked her console, a smile breaking through her tension. "It looks like it. The alien algorithm's weakening. Their changes are starting to unravel." Emrise released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "We did it. We actually did it." Zephyra grinned, a fierce light in her eyes. "Yeah, we did. Take that, you history-hating bastards." As they stood in the digital graveyard surrounded by the echoes of the past, Emrise felt a strange mix of relief and disbelief. They'd taken on the impossible and won, or at least they'd put up one hell of a fight. "So, what's next?" he asked, turning to Zephyra with newfound determination. She shrugged, the weight of their victory settling on her shoulders. "We keep going. We make sure the aliens can't just hit undo. We protect history, one data packet at a time." Emrise nodded, feeling the flickers of hope grow into something more substantial. "Sounds like a plan. And maybe, just maybe, we can start rebuilding what they've tried to erase." As they left the room, the hum of the ancient servers following them like a ghostly cheer, Emrise felt a sense of camaraderie stronger than any he'd known. They'd faced the darkness and emerged, not unscathed, but unbroken. "Think we'll ever catch a break?" he asked, more out of habit than expectation. Zephyra laughed, a sound full of life and resilience. "Maybe, but until then we've got work to do." With every step they took, Emrise felt the weight of history pressing down on them. A responsibility, yes, but also a privilege. They were the guardians of stories untold, the keepers of a future yet to be written. And as they ventured back into the corridors of Digital Earth's simulated world, Emrise knew that they weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for something far more enduring. The legacy of humanity, a testament to resilience and defiance in the face of oblivion. Let's show those aliens just what it means to mess with human history, Emrise declared, his voice filled with determination. Zephyra nodded, her expression one of fierce confidence. Damn right. They picked the wrong species to screw with. Together, they moved forward, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Because in the end, they were human, and humans never back down from a fight, especially when everything was on the line. Emrise and Zephyra made their way back through the pixelated labyrinth of Digital Earth, the glow of their success still faintly warming the chill in the air. Not that it did much to lighten the mood. The simulated corridors still felt like they were haunted by the ghosts of forgotten updates, and the occasional glitch in the landscape reminded them that their victory was far from complete. "You think we pissed off the whole alien coalition with that stunt?" Zephyra asked, her wrist console bleeping in a way that sounded suspiciously like it was laughing at a joke she hadn't heard. Emrise shrugged, his optimism tinged with a dose of reality. "Oh, I'm sure they're cursing our names in a language we can't pronounce. But hey, if they're not upset, we're probably not doing it right." "True," Zephyra agreed, sidestepping a flickering crack in the digital pavement that seemed to groan under the weight of their interference. "Maybe they'll send us an angry intergalactic memo." "Yeah, maybe with a cosmic restraining order attached," Emrise quipped, tilting his head at a holographic map spinning like a drunken compass on her console. "Are we even going the right way?" Zephyra tapped the map, which froze momentarily before recalibrating. "Depends on your definition of right way. In this place, directions are more suggestions than anything else." They continued their trek through Old New York, the cityscape an odd mashup of historical landmarks and forgotten architectural experiments. Each building seemed to sneer at them, like they'd been built specifically to mock humans who dared to tamper with digital destiny. Or maybe that was just Emri's imagination playing tricks again, a symptom of spending too much time in a world that couldn't decide between reality and screensaver. "Think we should head back to the Java Jitter for a victory cup," Emrise suggested, eyeing a neon sign that still flickered despite its age. "Only if you want to end this day with a side of heart palpitations," Zephyra replied dryly. "Besides, I doubt their baristas programmed to handle this level of existential crisis." "Good point," Emrise conceded, as they turned a corner and nearly collided with a holographic street vendor trying to sell them digital hot dogs. "Anyway, we should focus on making sure the algorithm doesn't throw a tantrum and undo everything we just did." Zephyra nodded, her fingers flying over her console, tapping into systems and settings that might as well have been written in ancient alien hieroglyphs for all Emrise knew. "I'm running diagnostics now. The data packets we restored should be stabilizing, but we need to keep an eye out for any retaliatory code." Emrise raised an eyebrow. "Retaliatory code? Now there's a concept that makes me want to crawl back into bed and pull the digital covers over my head." "Join the club," Zephyra replied, not missing a beat. "But we've got to face facts. That algorithm's about as stable as a toddler after 10 cups of coffee and a bag of sugar." "Sounds like a nightmare," Emrise said, grimacing at the thought. "But at least we're not dealing with a real toddler. My niece is bad enough." With each step, the city grew quieter, as if the network itself was holding its breath, waiting to see if this strange human intervention would hold. Emrise couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking through the eye of a digital storm, one that could burst back to life with a vengeance. "What's next on our disaster to-do list?" Emrise asked, hoping for a more optimistic answer than usual. Zephyra's eyes flicked to her console as she swiped through feeds and alerts. "For now, we head back to the hub, regroup, and monitor the changes. If the algorithm fights back, we need to be ready to counteract it." "Good thing I'm used to fighting losing battles," Emrise said, glancing at a holographic street sign that was trying to point in 3 directions at once. "Yeah, but this time we're not losing," Zephyra assured him with a determined nod. "We've got history on our side now. And history might be stubborn, but it's a hell of a lot harder to kill than a stubborn algorithm." "Fair enough," Imrise replied with a grin. "Stubbornness is kind of our brand, isn't it?" As they reached their dimly lit base camp, Imrise couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. Their small, cluttered hub might not look like much, but it held the tools they needed to keep humanity's story from being erased. The consoles hummed with activity, a symphony of digital life that had somehow come to mean more than just ones and zeros. It was their lifeline, their link to a past that refused to lie down quietly. "All right," Zephyra announced, sliding into a chair and pulling up a holographic display. "Let's see what kind of mess we've got to clean up." Imrise took a seat next to her, peering at the series of scrolling data. "You know, I never thought I'd miss paper and ink. At least those didn't glitch out on you." "True, but they also didn't come with nifty undo buttons," Zephyra pointed out, fingers dancing over the keys. "Besides, who needs paper when you've got digital chaos at your fingertips?" "Good point," Imrise admitted, watching as she navigated through layers of code and settings, her focus unwavering. "How are things looking?" "Not terrible," Zephyra replied, sounding almost surprised. "The algorithm's definitely weakened, but it's still poking around looking for vulnerabilities." "Let it poke," Imrise said with a shrug. "We've got our failsafe and we're not backing down." Zephyra flashed him a grin. "Damn right. We didn't come this far just to let some alien code rewrite history while we stand by twiddling our thumbs." As the day wore on, Imrise and Zephyra settled into a rhythm, monitoring the situation and ensuring their foothold in the digital domain held firm. The hum of the servers was a constant reminder of the battle they were waging, one that was as much about preserving the past as it was about securing the future. "Think we'll ever get used to this?" Imrise asked, half joking as he glanced at the tangled mess of wires that crisscrossed the room like a particularly aggressive batch of spaghetti. Zephyra chuckled, shaking her head. "Probably not. But then again, normal's overrated. Their makeshift command center might have lacked the grandeur of a traditional battlefield, but Imrise wouldn't have had it any other way." Here, amidst the flickering lights and chaotic cables, they were holding the line against an enemy that wanted nothing more than to erase everything they'd ever known. "Hey," Zephyra said suddenly, her eyes lighting up with the kind of mischief that usually spelled trouble. "What do you say we send the aliens a little message?" Imrise raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What kind of message?" "A reminder," Zephyra said, fingers flying over her console with the kind of precision that came from years of practice. "That they're not the only ones who can play the digital game." Imrise watched as she typed, a predatory grin spreading across her face. "You know, if you weren't on my side, I'd be terrified of you." Zephyra smirked, her fingers tapping out a final sequence before she hit send. "Lucky for you, I'm the friendly kind of terrifying." A moment later, the screen flickered, showing a simple message, one that was both a declaration and a warning. "Nice touch," Imrise said, chuckling as he read the words they'd sent out into the digital ether. "Thanks," Zephyra replied, her tone light yet fierce. Sometimes it's good to remind them just who they're dealing with. Together, they watched as the message echoed through the system, a defiant cry in the face of an overwhelming force. And as they sat there, surrounded by the hum of technology, Imrise felt a renewed sense of purpose. They might have been a small team, a ragtag duo navigating the chaotic world of digital warfare, but they were far from alone. They had history on their side, and that was a power stronger than anything the aliens could throw at them. "So, what's our next move?" Imrise asked, glancing at Zephyra with the kind of trust that could only be forged in battle. Zephyra leaned back, her eyes scanning the data scrolling before them. "We stay vigilant. We keep the failsafe active and make sure the algorithm doesn't slip through the cracks." Imrise nodded, feeling the weight of their responsibility settle onto his shoulders. but it was a burden he was willing to bear, a cause worth fighting for, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds. "Then let's get to it," he said, determination in his voice. "We've got a lot of work ahead of us." As they dove back into the digital fray, Emrise couldn't help but feel a sense of camaraderie, a bond that had been forged in the fires of conflict and tempered by the shared desire to protect what mattered most. And as they faced the challenges ahead, he knew one thing for certain: they'd continue to fight to preserve the past and secure the future, no matter what obstacles lay in their path. Because in the end, they were more than just two humans in a sea of data. They were warriors, protectors, and perhaps most importantly, they were not alone. With renewed energy, Emrise and Zephyra worked into the simulated night, the screens before them glowing with the light of untold possibilities. They'd come a long way, but their journey was far from over. And as they toiled on, Emrise felt a sense of hope, a belief that they could and would make a difference. In a world where history was under siege, they'd become its steadfast defenders, ready to face whatever came next with grit, determination, and a healthy dose of irreverent humor. "Here's to history," Emrise said, raising an invisible glass to the digital air. "Here's to us," Zephyra echoed, her voice filled with the same unyielding spirit. And with that, they returned to their task, ready to take on whatever challenges lay ahead, together. The dimly lit hub, their ragtag control center, pulsed with the energy of the thousands of lines of code they had just saved from oblivion. Emrise slouched back in his chair, eyes fixed on the ceiling like a man who'd just escaped a burning building. "Well, Zephyra," he said, rubbing his temples, "if this doesn't earn us a lifetime supply of digital coffee, I don't know what will." Zephyra smirked, her eyes glued to her wrist console. "Sure, let's add unstoppable caffeine supply to our wish list right after saving the world and paying rent on time." She flicked a few holographic buttons with a flourish that would make a magician envious. "But hey, at least history's back on its feet. For now." "For now," Emrise echoed, tapping his fingers on the console. Words that instill as much confidence as a politician's promise. They both knew that this wasn't the end of their worries. The alien algorithm might have been temporarily declawed, but it was still lurking in the digital shadows, waiting for a chance to pounce. Zephyra stretched, her joints cracking audibly, a testament to hours spent hunched over screens. "I suppose this is the part where we pat ourselves on the back and pretend everything's fine, right?" Emrise chuckled. "Yeah, but if we pat ourselves any harder, we might break something." Zephyra's wrist console beeped, a cheery little sound that, in this context, felt like a death knell. She glanced at it, her expression cynical enough to sigh or milk. "Lovely. Our alien friend just pinged another anomaly in the archives, like a digital cockroach that just won't die." "Surprises are rarely pleasant," Emrise muttered, watching the console's flickering display as if it might suddenly explode. "And this one has a penchant for dramatic comebacks," Zephyra sighed, leaning back in her chair with the kind of resignation that came from too many battles fought and too few won. "Well, at least history has proven tenacious. Humanity's legacy is a stubborn bastard, just like its defenders." "Stubbornness is kind of our brand, isn't it?" Emrise said with a wry grin. He looked at the tangled wires crisscrossing their feet like the intestines of some cybernetic beast. "Fancy a new hobby, like knitting, something less likely to blow up in our faces." "If by knitting you mean untangling this mess," Zephyra gestured to the wiring, "then sure. But first, we ensure these records stay intact." Emrise nodded, the weight of their responsibility settling in again, like an old coat you thought you tossed out. "Sure beats being outmatched by an alien coalition rewriting history, though." "Right," Zephyra agreed, her smile tinged with the kind of humor reserved for doomed men walking to the gallows. "But now we make sure our digital fortress doesn't become a sandcastle." Emrise watched her work, fingers a blur across the console, eyes sharp and calculating. She was the kind of person you wanted on your side in a crisis, the sort who could turn the impossible into a mildly inconvenient afternoon. What do we do about that hiccup in the archives? Zephyra glanced up, her expression serious now. We monitor it. If it escalates, we counter it. We've got the failsafe, remember. And history's not something you can kill with a flick of a switch. History's like a bad rash, Imrise added. It always comes back to bite you. They shared a tired laugh, the kind that could only come after surviving one hell of a day. Imrise felt a strange comfort in their banter, a reassurance that came from knowing he wasn't alone in this war against the unseen. The hub went quiet again, save for the gentle hum of the servers. It was a sound Imrise had come to associate with hope, or at least the hope that tomorrow wouldn't be the day they failed spectacularly. "Think we'll win this?" he asked, more out of habit than necessity. It was a question he asked every day, and every day the answer was the same predictable mix of optimism and grim reality. Zephyra didn't hesitate. As long as we keep waking up and fighting, we're winning. Besides, if the algorithm thinks it can take us down without a fight, it's in for a rude awakening. Spoken like a true history nerd, Imrise said, settling back in his chair, comforted by the chaos of their little hub, the place where they'd fought, bled, and laughed in the face of oblivion. Zephyra smiled, the kind of smile that hinted at both relief and the prospect of an endless battle. "And anyway, who says nerds can't save the world?" "Not me," Imrise replied, eyes flicking to the console, scanning for more threats. "I'm just glad to be on the right side of history for once." The Iors ticked by, each one building on the last, a slow crescendo in the symphony of their ongoing fight. But this, Imrise knew, was the nature of the beast. The trick wasn't just in winning today's battle, it was in making sure there was a tomorrow to fight for. Imrise leaned back, throwing his arms behind his head in a caricature of lazy confidence, and quirked an eyebrow at Zephyra. "Do you ever miss the days when our biggest problem was a lack of coffee?" Zephyra chuckled, shaking her head. "Those were the days, huh? Back when a stack overflow just meant you had too many tabs open. Now our tabs are more like planetary cataclysms," Imrise said, a mock cheerfulness in his tone that didn't quite reach his eyes. Zephyra leaned forward, steepling her fingers, her expression thoughtful. "The thing is, Imrise, we're not just saving history. We're saving the idea that humanity deserves to have one." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, well, history's never been a spectator sport. It's a contact one, and we've got the bruises to prove it. Besides," Zephyra added, folding her arms with a smugness that bordered on endearing, "we've faced worse than some alien code. Like that time you tried cooking for us," Imrise suggested with a wink. She shot him a mock glare. "I thought we agreed never to speak of that again." "Just keeping the history alive," he quipped. Their laughter echoed off the steel walls, a reminder that no matter how dire things got, they would never lose sight of the absurdity of it all. The world might be a digital minefield, but they were the ones who had chosen to dance across it, despite the odds. Eventually, the screens dimmed to a dull glow, the data stream slowing as if even the code needed a breather. Imrise stretched, groaning as his back popped in protest. "I guess it's time we shut down for the night. Let the algorithm stew in its own juices." "Right," Zephyra agreed, powering down her console with a series of quick taps. "But tomorrow we keep our eyes peeled. No rest for the wicked, and unfortunately, that includes us. Here's to another day of not being erased," Imrise toasted with an invisible glass, feeling the familiar weight of hope and despair settle in equal measure. "May we stay the annoying thorn in the algorithm's side," Zephyra added, mirroring his motion with a grin that was all teeth and tenacity. And as they flicked off the last of the consoles, the room plunged into darkness, save for the emergency lights casting long shadows like a promise. The kind of promise that said tomorrow would come with its own set of challenges and victories. But they would be ready because they'd learned that while history might repeat itself, it never did so verbatim. They'd make sure of it. As Imrise and Zephyra stepped out of the hub, leaving the tangled mess of their battlefield behind, They did so with the resolute knowledge that no matter what came next, they were not alone. History had its champions, flawed and tenacious as they were, and they would ensure it had a future. The world outside was silent, a digital cityscape frozen in time, a reminder of the fragility of their existence. But Emrise found solace in Zephyra's presence, in their shared determination to keep humanity's story alive. "Ready for another round tomorrow?" he asked, knowing full well the answer. Zephyra nodded, her expression one of quiet certainty. "Always." And with that simple exchange, they continued forward into the night that awaited them, as guardians of a history that refused to be erased. In a realm where everything could be rewritten with a keystroke, they stood as a testament to the resilience of human spirit, the unyielding defenders of a chronicle that was still being written, one line of code at a time.